The sight of blood freezing on her knuckles was what finally made Frances Ann stop and consider that perhaps washing clothes in January was a terrible idea. But the laundry would not do itself, and her father lay dying in the cabin behind her, which meant every responsibility fell upon her shoulders alone. The year was 1876, and San Antonio, Texas had seen one of its coldest winters in living memory. Ice formed along the edges of the San Antonio River where Frances knelt, her skirts soaked through despite her best efforts to keep them dry. At 22 years old, she had already buried her mother and two younger siblings, victims of the fever that swept through their settlement 3 years prior. Now her father fought his own battle with consumption, and Frances knew in her heart that this would be his last winter. The water burned her hands with its cold, but she scrubbed at her father's linens with grim determination. Blood stained them, evidence of his worsening condition, and she needed them clean. The boarding house where they lived provided little in the way of comfort or assistance. The other residents kept their distance, fearful of catching whatever illness plagued James Ann, and the landlady had made it clear that if the rent was not paid by month's end, both Frances and her father would find themselves on the street. Frances plunged another sheet into the frigid water, her breath coming out in white puffs. Her fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago, which she supposed was a mercy. The rough fabric scraped against her raw skin as she worked, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Crying accomplished nothing. Crying would not save her father, would not put food on their table, would not find her employment in a town where respectable work for unmarried women remained scarce. The sound of boots on frozen ground made her look up. A man approached, leading a paint horse behind him. He was tall, with broad shoulders beneath a worn leather coat and a hat pulled low against the winter wind. Frances quickly looked back down at her washing, hoping he would pass by. Strange men were not to be trusted. Her mother had taught her that much before the fever took her, but the footsteps stopped nearby. Frances kept her eyes on the laundry, her heart beating faster. She heard the horse snort and stamp its feet. "That water must be near freezing," the man said. His voice was deep, with a gentle quality that surprised her. "You will hurt yourself washing in such cold." "I have no choice," Frances replied curtly, not looking up. "The washing must be done." There was a pause. Then she heard him moving, doing something she could not see. Curiosity finally made her glance up. The man had gathered sticks and dried brush from the riverbank and was arranging them into a small pile. He wore a gun belt, she noticed, and his clothes marked him as a working cowboy, probably from one of the ranches outside town. His face was weathered but not old, perhaps close to her own age, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat. "What are you doing?" she asked, confused. "Building a fire," he replied simply, striking a match. "We will heat some water. Your hands are bleeding." Frances looked down at her knuckles and saw he was right. Blood mixed with river water, though she had not felt the cuts open. "I cannot afford to waste time," she said, but her voice wavered. The thought of warm water made her want to weep. "Not wasting time," the man said, coaxing the small fire to life. "Working smarter. I am Owen Lawrence from the Double R Ranch north of town, and you are killing yourself for no good reason when a small fire would make the work easier." The flames caught and grew, orange and beautiful against the gray winter landscape. Owen Lawrence stood and walked to his horse, pulling a dented metal bucket from his saddlebag. Without asking permission, he filled it with river water and set it near the flames to heat. Frances watched him, uncertain how to respond. Men did not typically help with washing. Men did not typically notice when women struggled with domestic tasks. Her father had been a good man once before the illness, but even he had never thought to make her work easier. Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. Owen glanced at her, his eyes a surprising shade of blue beneath the brim of his hat. "Because you need help," he said, "and because no one should have to wash in frozen water when a fire takes 5 minutes to build." He settled onto a rock near the fire, apparently content to wait while the water heated. His horse, well trained, stood quietly behind him. Frances found herself studying him more carefully now. He had strong hands, scarred and calloused from work, and his face held an honest quality that made her think perhaps he could be trusted. Or perhaps she was simply desperate enough to hope so. "I am Frances Ann," she said quietly. "I live in the boarding house on Commerce Street." "I know the place," Owen said. "Mrs. Fletcher runs it, does she not?" Frances nodded. The water in the bucket began to steam slightly, not boiling but certainly warmer than the river. Owen used a stick to pull it away from the direct flames, then stood and carried it over to where Frances knelt. He set it down beside her washing stones. "There," he said. "That should help." Frances dipped her hands into the warm water and nearly cried from the relief of it. The heat hurt at first, painful against her frozen fingers, but then feeling began to return. She pulled one of the stained sheets from the river and submerged it in the bucket instead. The warm water turned pink almost immediately. "Thank you," she whispered. Owen had returned to his spot by the fire. "You are washing a lot of linens," he observed. "Is someone ill?" Frances hesitated, then nodded. There seemed no point in lying. "My father. He has consumption. The doctor says it is only a matter of time." Her voice broke on the last word, and she looked away, ashamed of her weakness. "I am sorry," Owen said, and he sounded like he meant it. "That is a hard burden to carry alone." "Life is hard," Frances said, scrubbing at the fabric with renewed energy now that her hands could feel again. "Crying about it changes nothing." They fell into silence after that, but it was not an uncomfortable one. Owen kept the fire going, and when the water in the bucket grew dirty, he dumped it out and filled it again, heating a fresh batch. Frances worked her way through the pile of laundry, her progress much faster with warm water. The sun climbed higher, though it provided little heat on this frigid day. After perhaps an hour, Owen spoke again. "Have you eaten today?" Frances paused in her scrubbing. She had not, in fact. There had been no time, and food cost money they did not have. "I will eat later," she said. "That means no," Owen said. He stood and walked to his horse again, this time pulling out a cloth bundle. He unwrapped it to reveal bread, cheese, and dried meat. "Please," he said, bringing it over to her. "I have plenty." Frances wanted to refuse. Pride demanded she refuse. But her stomach betrayed her, growling audibly, and she found herself reaching for the offered food. The bread was fresh, the cheese sharp and good. She ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity, but she was hungrier than she had realized. Owen sat nearby, eating his own portion. "The double R is looking for someone to help with cooking and mending," he said casually. "The ranch hands are hard on clothes, always tearing things, and our current cook is getting too old to manage everything alone. The work would come with room and board, plus wages." Frances looked at him sharply. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you clearly need work," Owen said simply. "And because you obviously know how to wash and mend. I saw how carefully you were treating those linens, even in frozen water. That speaks to quality work." "I cannot leave my father," Frances said immediately. "He needs me." "The offer stands regardless," Owen said, "if circumstances change." He stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "I should head back. The foreman will wonder where I have been." Frances stood as well, awkwardly, her skirts heavy with water. "Thank you," she said, "for the fire and the food. You did not have to help me." Owen smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less weathered. "My mother raised me to help when help is needed," he said. He tipped his hat to her. "Good day, Miss Anne. I hope your father improves." He mounted his horse and rode away, and Frances was left alone by the dying fire with her clean laundry and a strange feeling in her chest. No one had been kind to her in so long. The simple act of building a fire and sharing a meal felt almost overwhelming. She gathered her washing and made her way back to the boarding house, her mind churning. The offer of work was tempting, desperately so, but how could she abandon her father? Yet without money, they would both end up on the street, which would surely kill him faster than the consumption. Her father was asleep when she returned, his breathing labored and wet. Frances hung the clean linens to dry and prepared thin broth from the last of their supplies. When James Ann woke, she helped him sit up and spooned broth into his mouth. He managed only a few swallows before exhaustion claimed him again. That night, lying on her narrow bed, Frances thought about Owen Lawrence and his unexpected kindness. She thought about his blue eyes and gentle voice, about the way he had built the fire without being asked, about how he had not made her feel ashamed for needing help. Most men in San Antonio looked through her as if she were invisible or worse, looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl. Owen had looked at her like she was a person deserving of basic human decency. The next morning, her father was worse. Blood spattered his lips when he coughed, and his skin had taken on a grayish tinge. Frances knew that look. She had seen it on her mother's face, on her siblings' faces in the final days before the end. "Frances," he whispered when she brought him water, "you need to think about what comes next." "Do not talk like that," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I am dying," James Ann said bluntly. "We both know it, and you cannot stay here alone. A young, unmarried woman with no family, no protection. It is not safe." "I will manage," Frances said. Her father reached for her hand, his grip weak. "You are strong like your mother, but strength only carries you so far. Promise me you will find somewhere safe to go." Frances promised, though she had no idea how to fulfill that promise. When her father slipped back into uneasy sleep, she sat beside him and tried not to think about the future. But Owen Lawrence's words kept returning to her. Room and board, plus wages. Honest work at her ranch where she might be safe. 3 days later, her father died. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to rise. One moment he was breathing, shallow but steady, and the next there was simply silence. Frances sat with him for a long time, holding his cold hand, before finally standing to make arrangements. The funeral was small, just Frances and the preacher. No one else came. She stood beside the fresh grave in the winter cold and felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. 22 years old, with no family, no money, and nowhere to go. Mrs. Fletcher gave her 2 days to vacate the room. "I am sorry for your loss, dear, but I have bills to pay. I cannot afford charity." Frances packed her few belongings into a single carpet bag and stood in the empty room that had been her home for the past 5 years. She had no plan, no prospects. The money from selling her father's few possessions would buy her perhaps a week at a cheaper boarding house. But then what? She thought of Owen Lawrence and the Double R Ranch. He had said the offer stood if circumstances changed. Well, circumstances had certainly changed, but she did not know where the ranch was exactly, only that it lay somewhere north of San Antonio, and she had no way to get there except on foot. The next morning, Frances put on her warmest dress, buttoned her mother's old coat over it, and set out walking north. She had perhaps $15 in her pocket, everything she owned in the world. The road stretched ahead of her, frozen and rutted, and she had no idea if she was making a terrible mistake. She walked for hours, past farms and small homesteads, past fields lying fallow under winter's grip. Wagons occasionally passed her, but none offered rides. A young woman alone on the road was either trouble or a target, and most people wanted nothing to do with either. By mid-afternoon, Frances was exhausted and beginning to panic. She had no idea how much farther the ranch might be, or if Owen Lawrence had even been serious about the job offer. What if she arrived and he did not remember her? What if the position had already been filled? She would have nowhere to go, no way back to San Antonio. She was considering turning around when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Frances moved to the side of the road, not looking back, praying whoever it was would simply ride past. But the horse slowed, then stopped. "Miss Anne." She turned to find Owen Lawrence staring down at her from his paint horse, his expression surprised. "What are you doing out here?" Relief flooded through her so powerfully she nearly stumbled. "I am looking for the Double R Ranch," she said. "You mentioned they needed help with cooking and mending." Understanding crossed Owen's face, followed by something that looked like sympathy. "Your father died 3 days ago," Frances said, keeping her voice steady. "I have no place else to go." Owen dismounted immediately. "I am very sorry," he said. "Come on. The ranch is still a few miles ahead, too far to walk before dark. You can ride." "I do not want charity," Frances said quickly. "This is not charity," Owen replied. "This is practical transportation to discuss potential employment. There is a difference." He held out his hand to help her mount. Frances hesitated, then accepted. She had little choice, really. Owen swung up behind her and they set off at a steady trot. Frances tried to sit properly, maintaining distance, but the horse's gait made it impossible not to lean back slightly against Owen's solid warmth. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder blade, steady and reassuring. "Tell me about the work," she said, trying to focus on practical matters. "What exactly would be required?" "Cooking for the ranch hands, mostly," Owen said. "There are about 15 men who work the Double R full-time. The current cook, Charlie Moss, has been with the ranch for 30 years, but his arthritis is bad now. He needs help with the heavy work. Beyond that, mending clothes, maybe some basic cleaning in the bunkhouse. The owner, Mr. Richmond, is a fair man. He pays decent wages and does not tolerate any mistreatment of workers." "And there is a place to live?" Frances asked. "There is a small cabin near the main house," Owen said. "Charlie uses it now. He would likely stay on but move into the bunkhouse, which would free the cabin for you. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry." It sounded like paradise to Frances. Her own cabin, honest work, safety, but she was not naive. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me. I could be terrible at cooking. I could be a thief." Owen was quiet for a moment. "When I saw you washing clothes in that frozen water," he said finally, "working until your hands bled to care for your dying father, I thought you were the most determined person I had ever seen. Determination like that is rare. It is valuable. And anyone who would work that hard in those conditions will be an asset to the ranch." "That is the only reason?" Frances asked, not sure why she was pushing. "No," Owen admitted. "I also thought you deserved better than frozen water and bleeding hands, and I wanted to help if I could." Something in his voice made Frances's heart beat faster. She said nothing, afraid of what she might say if she spoke. The Double R Ranch appeared as the sun began to set. It was larger than Frances had expected, with a main house, several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the distant fields, dark shapes against the fading light. Owen rode directly to the main house and helped Frances dismount. "Wait here," he said. "I will talk to Mr. Richmond." Frances stood in the growing cold, her carpetbag clutched in her hands, and tried not to think about what she would do if the answer was no. She had nowhere else to go, no backup plan. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Owen emerged from the house with an older man who had gray hair and sharp eyes. Mr. Richmond looked Francis up and down, not unkindly, but assessing. "Owen tells me you are looking for work," he said. "Yes, sir," Francis replied. "I can cook and mend and clean. I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." "Can you cook for 15 hungry men?" Mr. Richmond asked. "I have never cooked for that many," Francis admitted, "but I kept house for my father and myself for years, and I helped my mother cook for church gatherings before she died. I am willing to learn whatever I need to know." Mr. Richmond nodded slowly. "Owen says you were washing clothes in frozen water rather than let your father lie in soiled linens. That speaks well of your character. I will give you a trial period, 2 weeks with pay. If you work out, the job is yours permanently. If not, I will pay for your transport back to San Antonio." "Fair, more than fair," Francis said, relief making her dizzy. "Thank you, sir. I will not disappoint you. See that you do not," Mr. Richmond said, but his tone was not unkind. He called for one of the ranch hands to show Francis to the cabin, then disappeared back into the house. Owen walked with her as the ranch hand, a young man named Pete, led them to the small cabin Charlie Moss currently occupied. "Charlie will want to meet you," Owen said. "He is particular about his kitchen, but he is a good man. If you show respect for his territory, he will teach you everything you need to know." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a table, and a stove. But it was clean, and when Pete lit the fire, warmth began to fill the space. Francis set down her carpetbag and felt something loosen in her chest. This could be home. This could be safety. Charlie Moss arrived a few minutes later, a wizened man with gnarled hands and shrewd eyes. He looked Francis over much as Mr. Richmond had, then grunted. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, sir," Francis said. "Prove it. 5 o'clock tomorrow morning in the cookhouse. Owen, show her where it is." And with that, Charlie shuffled away, apparently satisfied with his inspection. Pete left as well, leaving Francis alone with Owen in the small cabin. "He liked you," Owen said, grinning. "If he had not, he would have said so immediately. Charlie does not waste time on pleasantries." "How could you possibly tell he liked me?" Francis asked. "He barely spoke." "Exactly. If he had not liked you, he would have spoken plenty, none of it good." Owen moved toward the door, then paused. "Will you be all right tonight? Do you need anything?" Francis looked around the cabin. It was more than she had dared hope for just this morning. "I have everything I need," she said softly. "Thank you, Owen, for everything. I do not know how to repay you." "Succeed here," Owen said simply. "That is repayment enough." He tipped his hat and left, closing the door gently behind him. Francis sat on the bed and let herself cry for the first time since her father's death. But these were not only tears of grief. They were also tears of relief, of exhaustion, of gratitude. She cried until she was empty, then washed her face in the basin of water someone had thoughtfully left and lay down to sleep. She woke before dawn, nervous about her first test. The cookhouse proved easy to find, a long building attached to the bunkhouse. Charlie was already there, moving slowly but efficiently, starting the fire in the large stove. "Flour is there," he said, pointing. "Lard is there. Show me what you can do." Francis took a deep breath and began to work. Her mother had taught her to make biscuits when she was 7 years old, and her hands remembered the motions even though years had passed. Mix the flour, cut in the lard, add the buttermilk, knead gently, cut rounds. She worked quickly but carefully, aware of Charlie watching her every move. The biscuits went into the oven. While they baked, Charlie had her start eggs and bacon for the hands who would arrive hungry for breakfast. Francis moved through the unfamiliar kitchen with growing confidence, finding tools and supplies, asking questions when needed. The biscuits came out golden and perfect. Charlie broke one open, steam rising, and took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully, his expression revealing nothing. "They will do," he said finally. "You can stay." Coming from Charlie, Frances realized this was high praise. She smiled, feeling the last of her tension drain away. She could do this. She would do this. The ranch hands began arriving for breakfast, and Frances served them alongside Charlie, learning names and faces. They were a rough bunch, weathered by sun and hard work, but they were polite enough. Most nodded their thanks, and some complimented the biscuits. Owen came in last, his hair damp as if he had dunked his head in the water trough. His eyes found Frances immediately, and he smiled. "How did it go?" he asked quietly as she handed him a plate. "Charlie says I can stay," Frances replied. "I knew you would do fine," Owen said. He took his plate to a table where several other hands sat, but Frances noticed he kept glancing back at her throughout the meal. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Frances woke before dawn to help Charlie prepare breakfast. After the hands ate and headed out to their work, she cleaned the cookhouse and began preparations for the midday meal. Afternoons were spent mending clothes that the ranch hands left in a basket by the cookhouse door, or helping Charlie prepare dinner. Evenings were her own, spent in the quiet of her cabin, and Frances treasured that peace more than she could say. Charlie proved to be an excellent teacher, patient when she made mistakes, generous with his knowledge. He taught her how to cook in quantity, how to make simple food tasty, how to stretch supplies when needed. Within a week, Frances felt confident in her abilities. Within 2 weeks, Mr. Richmond made her employment permanent. Owen remained a constant presence, though Frances tried not to think too much about why that pleased her. He always came to meals, always had a kind word or a joke to share. Sometimes in the evenings, he would stop by the cookhouse with a question about mending or to bring her supplies she had mentioned needing. These visits stretched longer each time, conversation flowing easily between them. One evening, about 3 weeks after Frances had arrived at the ranch, Owen appeared at the cookhouse after dinner with a bundle under his arm. "I found this in town," he said, setting it on the table. "I thought you might want it." Frances unwrapped the bundle to find fabric, several yards of good sturdy cotton in a deep blue color. "Owen, I cannot accept this," she said. "It is too much." "You have been mending everyone's clothes for weeks," Owen pointed out. "I noticed your own dress is wearing thin. Consider it payment for services rendered." Frances ran her hand over the fabric. It was beautiful, and he was right that her dresses were all threadbare and patched. But accepting gifts from a man felt dangerous, felt like it meant something. "I will pay you back," she said, "out of my wages." "Frances," Owen said gently, "it is a gift. You do not repay gifts." "Why?" Frances asked, the question bursting out of her. "Why are you so kind to me? What do you want?" Owen looked startled by her vehemence. "I do not want anything," he said. "Except maybe for you to accept that someone can be kind without ulterior motives." Frances felt her cheeks heat. "I am sorry," she said. "That was rude. I just do not understand. Men are not usually kind without expecting something in return." "Then you have known the wrong men," Owen said. He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, I enjoy your company. I enjoy talking with you. I look forward to seeing you at meals. If that is wanting something, then I suppose I am guilty. But I expect nothing from you beyond friendship if you are willing to give it." He left before Frances could respond, and she sat alone with the beautiful blue fabric, her heart racing. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten how to recognize genuine affection. But Owen's words, his actions, they all pointed to one truth that both terrified and thrilled her. He cared for her. And worse, much worse, she was beginning to care for him too. The winter began to loosen its grip on the land. February brought slightly warmer days, and the ice along the river's edge started to thin. Frances settled more fully into ranch life, becoming as much a part of the operation as any of the hands. She learned their preferences, their quirks, how to manage their rough humor and occasional conflicts. Charlie relied on her more and more, his arthritis making it difficult for him to do the heavy lifting and kneading. Owen continued his evening visits, though they both pretended there was always some practical reason for them. He needed buttons sewn. She needed wood split. He had news from town. She had questions about ranch operations. But the conversations that followed had nothing to do with buttons or wood or news. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their thoughts on life. Frances learned that Owen had come to Texas from Missouri 5 years ago, fleeing poverty and a stepfather who believed discipline came from fists. He had worked his way up from stable hand to a respected position as one of Mr. Richmond's most trusted men. He loved the work, loved the freedom of open land and open sky. Owen learned that Frances had grown up in San Antonio, that her father had been a clerk before illness took his ability to work, that she had once dreamed of being a teacher, but life had taken her in different directions. She spoke of her mother and siblings, grief still evident but softened by time and the telling. One evening in late February, Owen arrived at the cookhouse to find Frances struggling with a particularly large pot of stew. She was trying to lift it to pour the stew into serving bowls, but it was too heavy and too hot. "Wait," Owen said, rushing forward. "Let me help." Together they maneuvered the pot, pouring the stew safely, but Frances had gotten too close and steam rose to burn her forearm. She gasped and pulled back, and Owen immediately grabbed her arm to inspect the burn. "Cold water," he said, pulling her to the basin. He plunged her arm into the cold water, his hand supporting hers. "Keep it there." The burn was not serious, just a red mark that would fade. But Owen did not let go of her hand. He stood there, their hands submerged together in the cold water, so close Frances could feel the warmth of his body. "You need to be more careful," he said softly. "I know," Frances whispered back. Owen lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Frances," he said, his voice rough. "I know I said I expected nothing from you, but I need to be honest. My feelings for you have grown beyond friendship. I think about you constantly. I look for excuses to see you. I care for you more than I have ever cared for anyone." Frances's heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Owen, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Owen replied. "I just needed you to know I will not push you, I will not make things uncomfortable. But I needed to be honest." Frances pulled her arm from the water from his grasp, though it took all her willpower to do so. She dried her hands carefully, trying to gather her thoughts. "I care for you too," she admitted finally, "but I am afraid. I have lost everyone I ever loved. My mother, my siblings, my father. Everyone leaves, everyone dies. I do not know if I can bear to love someone again knowing I might lose them." "Life has no guarantees," Owen said. "I could get kicked by a horse tomorrow, you could catch fever, we could both live to be 90. None of us know how much time we have. But refusing to love because you fear loss, that is just another way of dying. You stop living, you just exist." His words struck deep because Frances knew they were true. She had been existing, not living, for so long. Going through motions, surviving but not thriving. The past few weeks at the ranch had reminded her what it felt like to be alive, to have purpose and connection, and much of that feeling centered around Owen. "I need time," she said, "to think, to be sure. This is all so much." "Take all the time you need," Owen said. "I am not going anywhere," he left, and Frances finished preparing dinner in a daze. That night, lying in her cabin, she thought about everything Owen had said. She thought about his kindness, his honesty, the way he made her laugh, the way he listened when she talked. She thought about how safe she felt around him, how natural it seemed when they worked side by side. She was falling in love with him, perhaps had already fallen. And that terrified her more than anything else. The next few days were awkward. Frances found herself hyper-aware of Owen's presence, of every glance and word between them. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression soft and yearning, and had to look away before her resolve crumbled. Charlie noticed, of course. The old cook missed nothing. "That boy is crazy about you," he said one morning as they prepared breakfast. "And unless I am losing my sight, you feel the same." "It is complicated," Frances said. "Love always is," Charlie replied. "But complicated does not mean impossible. Owen is a good man. Best hand on this ranch, hardest worker, most honest. You could do a lot worse." "I am afraid," Frances admitted. "Of course you are," Charlie said. "Anyone with sense is afraid of love. It is risk, no question. But the alternative is loneliness, and I can tell you from experience, loneliness is its own kind of death." His words echoed Owen's, and Frances wondered if perhaps both men were wiser than she had credited. That evening, when Owen appeared at the cookhouse with another practical excuse, Frances decided to be brave. "Walk with me," she said, untying her apron. They walked toward the river in the fading light, not touching but close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. The evening was cool but no longer bitter, spring beginning to assert itself. "I have been thinking about what you said," Frances began. "About existing versus living. You were right. I have been so afraid of loss that I stopped allowing myself to feel anything. But these past weeks, working here, talking with you, I have felt alive again. And it is because of you." Owen said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I cannot promise I will not be afraid," Frances said. "I cannot promise I will not sometimes pull away when things feel too intense. Loving someone, trusting them not to leave, that is hard for me after losing so many people, but I want to try with you if the offer still stands." Owen stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "The offer will always stand," he said. "For as long as you want it. I love you, Frances. I think I have loved you since I saw you washing clothes in that frozen water, too stubborn to quit, too strong to break. And I will wait as long as you need, move as slowly as you want. Just say you will give us a chance." "I will give us a chance," Frances whispered. Owen smiled, that transformative smile that made him beautiful. And slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, his lips soft against hers, his hand cradling her face like she was something precious. Frances melted into the kiss, her hands coming up to grip his coat, anchoring herself to this moment, this feeling, this man. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I will court you properly," he said. "With Mr. Richmond's permission, if you are willing. I want to do this right." "I am willing," Frances said, and felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. Owen did court her properly after that, with a formality that made Frances want to laugh and cry at the same time. He asked Mr. Richmond for permission to call on her, which the ranch owner granted with a knowing smile. He brought her wildflowers that began to bloom in the fields. He invited her on rides when she had free time, showing her the ranch's boundaries and the beauty of the land. He held her hand and kissed her goodnight with a restraint that spoke of deep respect. Frances found herself happier than she had been in years, maybe ever. The grief over her father's death began to ease, not disappearing but becoming manageable. She had purpose, work she enjoyed, friends among the ranch hands and particularly with Charlie, and she had Owen. Owen, who loved her with a steadiness that slowly convinced her he would not disappear. Spring arrived in full, transforming the brown landscape into green. Wildflowers bloomed everywhere, painting the fields in yellows and blues and reds. The ranch work increased as new calves were born and the hands prepared for the spring cattle drive to market. Frances worked longer hours to keep everyone fed, but she did not mind. This was her place, these were her people, and she belonged. One evening in April, Owen asked her to take a ride with him. They rode out to a hill that overlooked the ranch, arriving just as the sun began to set. The sky blazed orange and pink, the colors reflecting off the few clouds that drifted overhead. "I wanted to bring you here," Owen said as they dismounted, "because this is my favorite spot on the ranch. When I first arrived, feeling lost and unsure, I would come here and remind myself that I had made the right choice, that Texas was home now." "It is beautiful," Frances said, taking in the view. From here she could see the ranch buildings, the fields, the river winding through the land. It looked peaceful and perfect, a place where good things could happen. "I want to ask you something," Owen said, his voice nervous in a way Frances had never heard before. He pulled her to face him, taking both her hands in his. "These past months, courting you, being with you, have been the best of my life. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. And I know it has not been a year yet, and maybe this is too fast, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Frances's breath caught as Owen dropped to one knee. "Frances Ann, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy, keeping you safe, loving you with everything I have?" Tears streamed down Frances's face, but these were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." Owen stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, with none of the restraint he had shown before, and Frances kissed him back with equal passion. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathless, Owen pulled a ring from his pocket. "It was my grandmother's," he said, sliding it onto her finger. "The only thing I brought with me from Missouri. I have been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small stone, but to Frances it was more beautiful than any jewel. She looked at it on her finger, then at Owen's hopeful face, and felt a peace settle over her. This was right. This was meant to be. They were married 6 weeks later in late May, with the whole ranch in attendance. Mr. Richmond gave Frances away, Charlie stood up for Owen, and the ceremony took place in the ranch's small chapel that served the community. Frances wore a dress she had made herself from the blue fabric Owen had given her, and Owen wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, and his face shining with happiness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her to cheers from the assembled ranch hands. A celebration followed, with food and dancing and music provided by hands who had hidden their musical talents. Frances danced with Owen, with Charlie, with Mr. Richmond, with all the men who had become her friends and family. And when the evening ended, Owen carried her over the threshold of the cabin that was now their shared home. That night, lying in Owen's arms, Frances felt truly safe for the first time since her mother's death. She had a husband who loved her, a home, a community. She had built a new life from the ashes of the old, and it was good. The years that followed were full and happy. Frances and Owen worked together to build a life on the ranch. When Charlie's arthritis finally forced him to fully retire, Frances took over as head cook, and Owen was promoted to foreman when the previous foreman retired. They saved their money carefully, dreaming of eventually buying their own small ranch. In the spring of 1878, Frances gave birth to their first child, a son they named Oliver James, after Owen and Frances's father. Oliver was a robust baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. Owen was a devoted father, doting on the boy and helping with all the tasks that came with an infant. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Emma Rose, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. The cabin grew crowded with 2 children, so Owen built an addition, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. Life was not without challenges. There were drought years when the cattle struggled and money was tight. There were illnesses that Frances nursed her family through with her heart in her throat, terrified of losing someone else she loved. But Owen remained constant, steady, loving her through her fears and holding her when grief over past losses occasionally overwhelmed her. In 1882, Mr. Richmond made Owen an offer. He was getting older and wanted to retire. He had no children of his own, and he wanted to sell the ranch to someone who would care for it as he had. He offered it to Owen and Frances at a price they could afford, with generous terms for payment. It took everything they had saved, plus a loan from the bank, but they did it. The Double R Ranch became theirs. They kept the name out of respect for Mr. Richmond, who moved to San Antonio to live with his sister. Charlie stayed on, occupying the main house's guest room and serving as the unofficial grandfather to Oliver and Emma. Frances stood on the porch of the main house on the day the papers were signed, looking out over land that was now hers and Owen's. She thought about the girl who had been washing clothes in frozen water, desperate and alone, her father dying and her future bleak. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped to build a fire, who had shown kindness when he could have simply ridden past. Owen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How one act of kindness changed everything," Frances said. "If you had not stopped that day, if you had not helped me, I would have ended up on the street. I might not have survived. I could not ride past someone who needed help," Owen said. "But I will admit, I am selfishly glad I stopped. That frozen water led me to the love of my life." Frances turned in his arms to kiss him, still marveling that this man was hers, that this life was real. "I love you," she said. "Thank you for teaching me that it was safe to love again." "Thank you for being brave enough to try," Owen replied. They had 2 more children in the years that followed, another son named William in 1883 and a daughter named Grace in 1886. The ranch prospered under their management. Owen proved to be an excellent boss, fair but firm, and the hands respected him. Frances managed the household and the books, her mathematical skills honed from her father's teaching serving her well. Oliver grew into a strong boy who loved the ranch work and followed his father everywhere. Emma was gentle and loved animals, particularly horses. William was mischievous and kept everyone laughing. Grace was the baby, spoiled by everyone and fiercely protected by her older siblings. Charlie lived to see all 4 children born, passing away peacefully in his sleep in 1887 at the age of 78. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Frances planted wildflowers on his grave. He had been a friend and mentor, and they missed him deeply. As the years passed, Frances and Owen built the Double R into one of the most successful ranches in the area. They hired good people, treated them fairly, and built a reputation for integrity. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. Sometimes, on cold winter days, Frances would see younger women struggling with tasks too hard for them, and she would remember. She would send Owen or one of the hands to help, to build a fire or carry water or simply offer assistance. Because she knew what it meant to struggle alone, and she knew the power of a single kind act. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Owen surprised Francis with a trip to San Antonio. They left the children with trusted hands and spent 3 days in the city, staying in a nice hotel and eating in restaurants. Owen bought her a beautiful necklace, and Francis bought him a new saddle he had been admiring. On their last evening, they walked along the San Antonio River. Francis stopped near the place where she had once washed clothes in frozen water, where a cowboy had stopped to help her. The boarding house where she had lived was gone now, replaced by a new building. The city had grown and changed, but the river remained constant. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked. "Marrying me, living on a ranch instead of in town." Francis looked at the man who had shown her kindness when she needed it most, who had loved her patiently until she was ready to love him back, who had given her a family and a home and a life beyond anything she could have dreamed. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You saved my life that day, Owen, and every day since, you have made it worth living." Owen pulled her close, kissing her tenderly. "You saved mine too," he said. "I was just going through motions before I met you. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting." They stood by the river as the sun set, holding each other. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life that would last. Years continued to pass in contentment. Oliver grew into a man and took on more responsibility at the ranch, eventually marrying a schoolteacher named Sarah in 1898. Emma married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Thomas, in 1900. William and Grace were still young, still at home, still filling the house with energy and life. Francis and Owen grew older together, their hair graying, their faces weathering like the land they loved. But their love never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed goodnight. They still sometimes rode out to that hill overlooking the ranch to watch the sunset and remember all they had built together. In 1902, Oliver and Sarah had their first child, a son they named Owen James. Frances held her grandson and felt her heart overflow. This was legacy, she realized. This was immortality, not in living forever but in the love and lessons passed down through generations. When Frances was 51 and Owen 53, they decided to gradually turn the ranch over to Oliver. He had proven himself more than capable, and Frances and Owen wanted time to travel, to rest, to simply enjoy each other's company without the constant demands of running a large operation. They built a smaller house on the ranch property, a cozy place just for the two of them. From its porch, they could see the main house where Oliver and Sarah lived with young Owen James, where Emma often visited with Thomas, where William worked as foreman, where Grace was courting a nice young cowboy named Peter. "We did good," Owen said one evening, sitting on that porch watching the sunset. "We built something that will last beyond us." "We did," Frances agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "All because you stopped to build a fire for a woman washing clothes in frozen water." "Best decision I ever made," Owen said, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the land they loved fade into dusk. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer, they could hear Grace laughing at something Peter said. The sounds of home, of family, of love. Frances thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate orphan to matriarch of a thriving family. She thought about loss and grief, about taking chances and risking love despite fear. She thought about how one act of kindness, one moment of human decency, could change the entire trajectory of a life. "Thank you," she said softly to Owen. "For what?" he asked. "For everything," Frances said. "For stopping that day, for being patient with me, for loving me so well. For giving me this life." Owen turned to face her, his blue eyes still as bright as they had been that day by the river 26 years ago. "Frances Lawrence," he said, Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. And I would do it all again, exactly the same, if it meant ending up right here with you." He kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, and Frances kissed him back with all the love and gratitude in her heart. They had built a beautiful life together, full of laughter and love, children and grandchildren, hard work and deep satisfaction. The stars emerged one by one in the vast Texas sky, watching over the ranch, over the couple on the porch, over the family they had created. And if those stars could speak, they might have told a story about a woman and a man, about frozen water and unexpected kindness, about how love can bloom in the harshest conditions if tended with patience and care. But the stars kept their silence, as stars do, and the story belonged to Frances and Owen alone. A story that would be told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren in years to come, passed down as family legend. The story of how their family began with a simple act of compassion on a frozen winter day, when a cowboy saw a woman in need and chose to help instead of riding past. That choice made all the difference. That choice created a legacy of love that would endure for generations, proof that kindness matters, that love is worth the risk, and that from the coldest, hardest moments can come the warmest, most beautiful futures. Frances and Owen lived many more years together, growing old surrounded by family and love. They held great-grandchildren and celebrated golden anniversaries, and watched the ranch continue to prosper under Oliver's capable management. When Frances finally passed away in her sleep at 73, Owen held her hand and told her he loved her one last time. He followed her less than a year later, unable to bear life without his beloved wife. They were buried side by side on that hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where Owen had proposed all those years ago. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and a single inscription chosen by their children. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued, passed down to Oliver and eventually to his children. The story of Frances and Owen became family lore, told and retold, inspiring new generations to choose kindness, to risk love, to help those in need. The small cabin where they had started their married life still stood, preserved as a reminder of humble beginnings. And on cold winter days, when ice formed on the San Antonio River and the world seemed harsh and unforgiving, someone would remember the story of a woman washing clothes in frozen water and the cowboy who stopped to help. They would remember that single acts of kindness can change lives, that love can grow in the most unlikely places, and that the greatest legacies are built not from wealth or fame, but from compassion and devotion. The Double R Ranch stood as testament to that truth, thriving into the new century and beyond, built on the foundation of love between two people who found each other when they both needed it most. Frances had been washing clothes in frozen water, her hands bleeding, her future bleak. Owen had heated that water and washed beside her, offering help without expectation of reward. From that simple beginning grew a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest impact, and that choosing compassion over indifference can change not just one life, but countless lives across generations. Their story ended, but their legacy lived on, carried forward by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who inherited not just land and cattle, but values and love. They learned to stop for those in need, to offer warmth to those suffering from cold, to build fires for those who had none. They learned that love requires bravery, that trust must be earned through consistency, and that the greatest rewards in life come from opening your heart despite the risks. The sun continued to rise over the Double R Ranch, golden light spreading across fields where cattle grazed and horses ran free. The San Antonio River continued to flow, cold in winter and cool in summer, carrying with it the memory of a day when everything changed. And somewhere in the Texas wind, if you listened carefully, you might hear the echo of laughter, of love, of two souls who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. This was their story. This was their truth. And it proved beyond any doubt that love conquers all, that kindness matters more than power, and that from the frozen waters of despair can come the warmest springs of joy. Francis and Owen's love story was complete, their journey finished, their legacy secure. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for.